This week's episode, we're going to be taking a look into the crystal ball of Linux, and we're going to be seeing into the future for the roadmaps that were given to us by various projects like Ubuntu, GNOME, Mozilla Firefox, and others. Plus, we have some new releases like Alpine Linux and MX Linux, and a lot more to check out. So let's jump into the episode of This Week in Linux, your source for Linux good news. This episode of Twill is sponsored by LINBIT. More on them later. Ubuntu 24.10 is going to be shipping Wayland by default for NVIDIA users. This is a big change to the fact that NVIDIA has always had X11 on Ubuntu, and whereas Wayland would be on the AMD and Intel systems because of the fact that NVIDIA has been not the greatest steward of the community ever. So it's interesting they're making this decision. And the reason why we'll get to in a second. But Ubuntu first switched to Wayland as its default display server in 2017 with 17.10. And it wasn't ready. So they switched it back to X11. Now this makes sense because the next release after that was an LTS. So 17.10 was treated more like a testing ground to see if Wayland was ready for wide adoption. And it was not. But then Ubuntu switched the default to Wayland again in 2021, and for most people, that has been what they have been using ever since. However, that is not the case for NVIDIA users, as support for NVIDIA on Wayland was, and still kind of is at this point, pretty bad. Over the past couple of years, though, NVIDIA has decided to stop being a nuisance here and actually support Linux in a reasonable way on Wayland. Now, NVIDIA used to want to make their own proprietary solution for Wayland support, and with this solution, all of the desktop environments would have to maintain two different sets of Wayland efforts, one for NVIDIA and one for everyone else. Those developers of various DEs banded together to going against NVIDIA on this and told them no, they won't do that. And NVIDIA fought for a while, still insisting that their way is the best way and that it was happening, but eventually they gave in. The open source developers won the battle, so the NVIDIA would have to use the same system that everyone else would use, which is fantastic because it actually shows that with enough might and resiliency, you can even get NVIDIA to change their mind. It'll still take a while and it'll suffer a little bit, but you can. We see that now. So fast forward to today, we have a bright future for NVIDIA users who are going to need to use Wayland eventually. We talked about explicit sync in Twill 259 and how that's going to make it much, much better. And also, with this making its way across the ecosystem soon, that means that maybe Wayland will finally play nice with NVIDIA, or vice versa. It's really NVIDIA's fault. But Oliver Smith of Canonical says that there are still a few known issues with this combination due to the heavy use of Ubuntu desktop in AI and machine learning, and also VFX and other industries. They say that because of this, they have included that it was too early to make it the switch in Ubuntu 24.04, which also makes sense since it's an LTS. But interim releases are kind of like a test bed for Ubuntu. So Oliver says that this list has now shrunk to a number that makes us feel confident in enabling it in the upcoming interim release. And this will give them time to find and fix any issues that might exist prior to the next LTS, which is coming in 2026. And this is really good news because NVIDIA users have always had to deal with not being able to use Wayland, and they would still have some screen tearing and that sort of stuff, the issues of X11. But this is really cool because, in the future, it'd be nice to have complete support with Wayland on regardless of your hardware. In addition to this Ubuntu news, there's also some more stuff related to the Snap Store. There's a brand new version of the Snap Store website, which is certainly a welcome improvement to the previous iterations. And whether you like snaps or not, there's no denying that they have a role in the ecosystem. And lastly, Ubuntu has made upgrades ready for 23.10 to go to 24.04. So if you were waiting to upgrade, like I was, you can now do that. And I just so you know, I just did that before the recording, and it worked great. So there you go. When someone is interviewed for a job, one of the most common questions they'll hear is, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Apparently, someone asked that to the GNOME Foundation because they just shared a draft release of their 5-year strategy outlining goals to grow the GNOME community and also improve the user experience. So let's talk about those. We're going to talk about it more of a highlight overview style, but because there's a lot of stuff in this. So if you want to see the whole thing, we'll have that linked in the show notes. There are 3 top tier goals, with goal 1 being people or growing the GNOME community. So they want to increase diversity, attract more women, people of color, users from underrepresented regions, people with disabilities, and more, including opportunities for these people to attain leadership positions. And they're also working on the GNOME Pathways Initiative, which is a really cool because it's an education program to recruit and mentor new developers from various backgrounds. Also, improved communication, which means they're going to be strengthening communication between the GNOME developers, users, and the GNOME Foundation. And they also, within this GNOME Pathways Initiative, they have a tagline that's about putting power in people's hands, which is where they're going to highlight the social impact of GNOME in empowering users and that sort of stuff. So they also want to increase direct economic benefit of GNOME for developers through certification programs, API course, badge program, promotion on the Flat Hub, and various other things. They also say that, for as an example, they say that launching a badge program powered by GNOME, users can buy GNOME-approved devices, and then they would create supply chains and also launch a GNOME certification course for creators to fuel learning and quality output, which is pretty interesting, especially that whole powered by GNOME thing. That would be interesting to see devices having that on there and what kind of devices those would be. Another thing that I feel like is very important to note is that they're talking about creating more commercial and various types of partnerships that can drive an increase in users and creation of more apps. This is really cool because if they can get partnerships that will actually help fund and make the project grow, that would be awesome. They even say like including the correct strategic partnerships with governments, universities, and nonprofit partners to reach new, underserved, and diverse audiences. The next goal is to improve GNOME software and services. So the GNOME Development Initiative is a focus on core GNOME needs like security and accessibility, which is really cool because accessibility is a very important topic that doesn't really get a lot of attention because it's not the vast majority of people that have to deal with these sorts of stuff. And I think that it's such an important piece because when you apply things like this, you actually are going to enhance the experience for everyone because you're making things in a much more streamlined and more efficient way, but also in a more accessible way. So that's cool that they're working on that. And GNOME has been known to work on that quite a lot, but it's really, really good to see that they're actually making a whole part of the goal to be it. They're also going to be doing some more stuff for the Flat Hub, as well as economic benefits for developers, like create new ways for developers to earn money from GNOME, which is very cool because a lot of projects don't really put any emphasis on the fact that developers are doing stuff in their spare time. And sometimes that's okay because there's other funding other places, or maybe they don't even want to get funding. But it's also important to have funding for developers so that they can spend their time on the thing that you want them to spend the time on. So that's really good to see that. And goal 3 is to strengthen the GNOME Foundation. They want to raise more money to support GNOME projects and initiatives. They also want to document the impact that the GNOME Foundation has by showcasing the value and the accomplishments of the GNOME project. Of course, there's a lot more detail, like I said in the beginning of the topic. So if you want to learn more about it and see the whole roadmap, you can check the links in the show notes. But for those who are hoping that the roadmap would include app indicators or system tray menus, it doesn't. Mozilla has shared their roadmap for upcoming Firefox features, which includes a lot of very sought-after items. This roadmap is focusing on improvements in productivity, customization, and AI integration, though the AI integration is not excessive like a lot of places have been doing. So here's a quick rundown of what's on the roadmap. They're going to be adding some new features for tab management, which is really cool. They're going to be adding vertical tabs, improved tab grouping options, which is great because I don't even think there are tab grouping options unless you count the container tabs. I'm not sure. And there's also going to be a new profile management system. And I like the container tabs. I think it's great. But I know a lot of people would prefer a full profile solution instead so they can switch back and forth from work, or maybe they have multiple work profiles, or they have like their own personal profile in addition, and they don't want to have it all connected. And the container tabs is a really cool concept that I think should be in the default Firefox, but for some reason isn't. And but I do get the idea of having profiles separate because it would be nice and a lot cleaner to have them separate at all times and automatically separate when you open the profile. So I could see why that would be a value as too. So I think both would be great, and both being default would be, Moving on. There's also some changes to the visual aspects of Firefox, with the new tab section getting some wallpapers instead of the basic color. And this is cool, but it's also kind of limited. The selection is only like 6 images, but they do include nighttime versions, which I do appreciate that. So for those who like dark mode or just have it where it goes back and forth between day and night, that's nice to have. And they're also making a simpler privacy settings interface. And it's always nice to simplify things. And now for the AI integration, which is apparently going to be added to literally everything on the planet. But in this case, I actually like the way they're doing it because they say when it comes to adding AI features to Firefox, they only want features to include features which solve tangible problems, not for adding AI for the sake of adding AI, which is fantastic. They say the first step for this is AI-generated alt text for images that users can add through their documents using the browser's PDF editor, which is really nice because a lot of the times alt text is not included with websites for images, and having that automatically generated would be a nice way to optimize that. Hopefully they do that more so as far as the developer tools and that sort of stuff. That would be great. Like checking to see if there's any alt text and then scanning the images and then giving it to you as a developer. I would like that. So do that. Mozilla also says they're looking to use local on-device AI models where possible in order to preserve privacy, which is unlike everyone else. So awesome. And this is the kind of thing that they are doing with the language translation feature as well. So happy to see that. Other improvements include continuing focus on speed, performance, and compatibility across all platforms, including mobile, collaboration with other tech companies to improve web standards and interoperability, which is very good because the idea that we're going back to the horrible days of the 90s where they say website best viewed in insert browser and insert version, that's happening again when people would say it's best viewed in Chrome or whatever. I hope that stops because that is very annoying. Now, you can also get involved in help testing the new stuff that's coming in Firefox. You can test features early in the Firefox preview channels. You can share your ideas on Mozilla Connect and the Mozilla Discourse Forum. And they're also going to be doing an AMA on Reddit pretty soon. They haven't given a date yet, but that's planned, so you could participate in that. And if you'd like some more Firefox-related content, then check out the latest show notes for the links to all of the Firefox videos I've made on this channel. This episode of Twill is sponsored by LINBIT, and LINBIT is a company with deep roots in Linux block storage and has been developing storage software for over 25 years. Their open source DRBD replicates writes to multiple hosts, ensuring resiliency at the host level, enabling high availability for many platforms. LinStore is their open source software-defined storage, or SDS, solution that manages DRBD as well as the underlying storage configurations to add the features you're used to seeing in enterprise-grade storage. As you probably already noticed, LINBIT is a company that pushes forward open source by releasing their software openly. So check out LINBIT by going to thisweekinlinux.com/LINBIT to learn more about how LINBIT can help you protect your data and make your business highly available. There is a new spin coming to the Fedora Linux project, and this spin will launch with Fedora 41, and it's called Fedora Miracle. No, this is not a revival of the best codename version of Fedora ever, unfortunately, which was Beefy Miracle, but rather this new spin, yes, Beefy Miracle, yes, even had a logo of a hot dog guy. Yep. But rather this spin will ship the Miracle Window Manager as the default. Now, the Miracle Window Manager is a Wayland compositor built on top of Mir. While it is a newer project, it contains many useful features such as a manual tiling algorithm, floating window manager support for many Wayland protocols, proprietary NVidia driver support, and more. Now, I'm not sure if it has automatic tiling or not, which would be good to have. I like the idea of having the option for manual tiling because some tiling window managers don't give you that option. So I like that, but I would also like both, really. Now, Miracle WM is akin to i3 and Sway, but they say the goal of Miracle WM is to be flashier than those for people who prefer a desktop full of smooth transition and colors. As you've probably noticed on this particular video version of the show, I'm not showing any videos. I'm just showing you a single screenshot. That's because I could only find one screenshot. For something that's supposed to be flashier and full of smooth transitions and colors, it's a good idea to have more screenshots than one, and also probably a video demonstrating the transitions. That's just my opinion. It is better than a lot of projects. I've seen some projects that talk about, something that requires something to be visual, and then not even offering a single screenshot. So this is better than that. But one screenshot is the bare minimum I would recommend putting up a video at some point. If you'd like to learn more about this, you'll find links in the show notes. Alpine Linux is a security-oriented, lightweight Linux distribution based on MesoLibC and BusyBox, and it is a very popular option for embedded systems and containers, and they just released a new version with Alpine Linux 3.20. They have upgraded a bunch of software across the board, including LLVM 18 compiler, Python 3.12, Node.js 20.10, Ruby 3.3, Rust 1.78, Go 1.22, and .NET 8, as well as updates to the desktop environments with GNOME 46, KDE Plasma 6, and Sway 1.9. They've also done something a little bit risky. They've added RISC-V support, or more specifically, initial support for 64-bit RISC-V architecture, which is really cool to see, because that means that people will be able to do embedded systems with RISC-V, and that would be awesome because RISC-V needs to be more adopted much more quickly because it is a very cool architecture and needs to have, much more growth. So I'm happy to see that this embedded distribution is considering support for that. So if you'd like to learn more about Alpine Linux 3.20 or just Alpine Linux in general, you'll find links in the show notes. There's a new release of MX Linux with MX Linux 23.3. This new version includes software updates, new features, and easier language management. They've updated the packages across the distro by updating with based on Debian 12.5 Bookworm. They've also made some updates to the hardware-enabled version, which is the AHS edition. It offers a new Linux kernel with 6.8.9 for improved compatibility over the, I'm pretty sure, 6.1 kernel. Also, they made some improvements to the live system. So ZSTD or Z standard compression option has been added for the live remaster or the Antex live system. And rudimentary support for systemd on the live system has been added with this release. They've also made some improvements for the language management with the new MX Locale tool, which makes it easier to remove unused language packages. The Raspberry Pi edition of MX, or the MX Raspberry Pi Respin, has been updated with the latest packages from both MX Linux and the Raspberry Pi OS repos. If you'd like to learn more about the latest release of MX Linux, you'll find links in the show notes. Up next in the show is IceWM, and this is a very lightweight window manager, and the latest version of IceWM 3.5 brings new features and improvements. If you're looking for a very minimal and efficient user experience, then it might be something for you to consider. So here are the highlights of what's new in IceWM 3.5. They included a new -I or -- install option that makes it possible to install an IceWM -extra theme. Also, there's a file argument completion in the address bar now. There's also a new CD and PWD commands in the address bar, and improved tilde expansion on user login names. Now, the changelog also includes many other items, but they're not very detailed. They're not very detailed. So one of those items says, when lowering a frame by keywin lower, also lower it in the focus order. Okay. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I assume it's based on like the Alt-Tab sort of thing, but don't know exactly. The next one, though, is much more clear. Don't use xsend event for internal window manager actions, or WM actions, but use xputback. Why, you might ask? I'm not sure. It's not very detailed. So this is really cool. IceWM is a really cool window manager. It's very efficient, very lightweight, and is also not the most detailed changelogs. So just a quick request. Make those a little bit more detailed, please. If you'd like to learn more about IceWM, you'll find links in the show notes. HandBrake 1.8, the latest version of this very popular open source video transcoder, has arrived. This update brings new features and improvements, making it easier than ever to convert your videos to the format that you might need. Here's a quick rundown of the highlights for this release. So HandBrake 1.8 finally sports the GTK4 UI, and this is really nice. And speaking of UI, the app icons got a refresh, and there are new flags for more granular control over your encoding queue. Also, if you have any need to convert a bunch of videos at the same time, well, that's not a problem anymore because HandBrake 1.8 now supports drag and drop multi-file scanning. And there's also a bunch of love for various encoders like the FFV1 encoder support, multi-pass encoding with VP9, and even Dolby Vision pass-through for SVT AV1. And that's not all. There's a lot more. This update brings a bunch of other improvements under the hood, making HandBrake 1.8 even more powerful than it was before. So if you're ready to dive in, head over to the HandBrake website and grab yourself a copy. Back in the 1980s, there was an epic console war. The first big one ever, I think. It was between Atari and Intellivision. Well, dust off your joysticks because those 80s titans are back in the news. But this time, they're playing co-op. Atari just acquired a huge chunk of Intellivision, including the brand itself and over 200 classic game titles. This move is a power play for Atari, who's been on a buying spree, and they've been scooping up studios and IPs left and right, clearly aiming at some kind of comeback. So what does this mean for gamers? Well, Atari says that they plan to breathe new life into those classic Intellivision titles with expanded digital and physical distribution. They might even develop some all-new games based on those retro favorites. So that would be really interesting to see. And here's a quote from the CEO of Atari. It says, "This was a very rare opportunity to unite former competitors and bring together fans of Atari, Intellivision, and the golden age of gaming," said Wade Rosen, the CEO of Atari. Also, Mike Micah, studio head at Digital Eclipse, which is an Atari-owned game studio, says that uniting Atari and Intellivision after 45 years ends the longest-running console war in history. Now, that's interesting to say that it ended the console war, because many people thought it ended in the 90s when they both stopped making consoles, where they both kind of lost to Nintendo, you know? Anyway, that just made me laugh, and I had to let you know. Anyway, this is interesting news. I don't really like the whole consolidation of the gaming industry, but for Atari and Intellivision, I think it's probably okay, especially considering Intellivision isn't really doing much anymore. I don't know if they are at all, but yeah. So let me know what you think in the comments below about that particular topic. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on the show and want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world, then be sure to subscribe. And of course, remember to like that smash button. If you'd like to support the show and the Tux Digital Network, then consider becoming a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/membership, where you can get a bunch of cool perks like access to the patron-only sections of our Discord server and much more. You can also support the show by ordering the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt or the This Week in Linux shirt at tuxdigital.com/store. Plus, while you're there, check out all the other great stuff we have like hats, mugs, hoodies, and so much more. tuxdigital.com/store. I'll see you next time for another episode of your source for Linux news. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell. I hope you're doing swell. Be sure to ring that notification bell. And until next time, I bid you farewell.